Welcome to Fearlit, the place where we unearth history's most disturbing tales from its darkest corners. Today, we explore a centuries-old mystery that has haunted one of England's most ill-fated families. What you are about to hear is the macabre history of the Corbin, a lineage where every firstborn has died in the very same way. Our story begins with the rain lashing against the windows of Corbin Manor. That imposing stone structure stands defiant against the Northumberland landscape, its weathered facade a silent witness to generations of inexplicable tragedy. The locals shun its shadow, crossing themselves whenever the family name is spoken. They call it the Corbin curse, a pattern so precise, so unwavering, that it defies all explanation by coincidence. For more than 300 years, tracing back to 1678, every firstborn Corbin child has perished on the very night of their 7th birthday, not a single day before, nor a day after. It always happens during the darkest hour, and they are always discovered in the same position, lying face down, arms outstretched, as if reaching for something or someone. There are no marks, no signs of a struggle, and no evidence of foul play. Only the unmistakable expression of terror, frozen upon their innocent faces. While medical examiners across the centuries have listed the cause as cardiac arrest, the chilling consistency of the circumstances points to something far more sinister at work. What force could claim a child with such ritualistic precision? What dark covenant has bound this family to so terrible a fate? Our investigation starts with Thomas Corbin, a prosperous merchant who returned from the East Indies in 1677. The fortune he amassed allowed him to purchase the manor and its surrounding lands. Historical accounts paint Thomas as a stern, pragmatic man with a keen interest in the occult, a fascination born from his travels through India and the Orient. Local records show he brought back numerous artifacts and books on esoteric subjects, establishing a private collection that would become legendary among scholars of the arcane. In the spring of 1677, Thomas married Elizabeth Hale, the daughter of a neighboring landowner. Their union was blessed with a son, Jonathan, born on Midsummer's Eve in 1678. The arrival of an heir brought tremendous joy to the Corbin household, but that joy was tragically short. On the night of Jonathan's 7th birthday, a violent storm descended upon the estate. Servants reported hearing strange sounds from the child's bedchamber, not screams or cries, but whispers, as if the boy was deep in conversation with an unseen visitor. At dawn, when his nurse entered the room, she discovered Jonathan lying face down on the floor, his arms outstretched and his small body already cold. His eyes were wide open, his pupils dilated, in what the attending physician would call the most profound terror I have witnessed in my 40 years of practice. Devastated by grief, Thomas Corbin plunged even deeper into his occult studies, locking himself away in his library for days on end. Elizabeth, unable to bear the weight of her sorrow, took her own life just 6 months later, leaving Thomas alone in the imposing manor, with only his books and artifacts for company. 5 years after Jonathan's death, Thomas remarried. His new wife was a woman named Sarah Winchester, 20 years his junior. Their first child, another son named Richard, was born in 1685. As Richard's 7th birthday drew near, Thomas grew increasingly agitated. He hired guards to stand watch outside the boy's room, consulted with clergymen, and even attempted to perform what witnesses described as rituals of protection around the estate. None of it made a difference. Richard Corbin died in the exact same manner as his half-brother. He was found face down with arms outstretched on the morning after his 7th birthday, his face contorted in an expression of absolute horror. This pattern would repeat itself with merciless consistency through the generations. Thomas Corbin died in 1696. Leaving his estate to his 3rd son, William, who had somehow survived past his 7th year, likely because he was not a firstborn. William would later lose his own firstborn daughter, Mary, in 1712. Her body was discovered in that identical position, bearing the same expression of terror that had become the hallmark of the Corbin curse. What could possibly explain this chilling pattern? Local folklore offers various theories. A witch's curse placed upon Thomas for stealing treasures from a sacred temple during his travels, a demonic pact demanding the sacrifice of firstborn children, or perhaps something far more ancient that had attached itself to the land long before the Corbins ever arrived. Parish records from St. Michael's Church revealed that in 1724, following the death of another Corbin child, the local priest attempted an exorcism of the manor. That priest, Father Ambrose Blackwood, left detailed accounts of his experience. He wrote of an oppressive presence that seemed to seep from the very walls, and of whispers in an ancient tongue that caused candles to flicker and die. The exorcism was abandoned when Father Blackwood collapsed, suffering a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak for the rest of his life by the mid-18th century. The Corbin family had become notorious throughout England. Despite their wealth and social standing, they found themselves increasingly isolated, as few families were willing to connect themselves to such a cursed bloodline through marriage. Yet the Corbins persisted, each generation hoping to be the one that finally broke the pattern which had claimed so many innocent lives. In 1783, Charles Corbin, a man of science rather than superstition, approached his son Edward's 7th birthday with methodical determination. He invited physicians from London and Edinburgh to observe the boy through the night. The room was lit with dozens of candles, and 4 men kept a constant vigil at the child's bedside. Charles himself stood guard at the door, a loaded pistol in his hand, as midnight approached. The physicians noted a sudden drop in temperature. The candles dimmed, despite no detectable draft. Edward, who had been sleeping peacefully, began to whisper in his sleep words none of the observers could understand, but which one physician described as ancient and guttural. At precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, every candle extinguished simultaneously. In the ensuing confusion, as the men scrambled to relight the room, Edward was somehow moved from his bed to the floor. By the time light was restored, the boy lay in the now familiar position, face down, arms outstretched, his face frozen in terror. None of the observers could explain how it happened, or what force could have stopped a child's heart. Without leaving a single mark, Charles Corbin's detailed account of that night, along with the signed testimonies of the physicians present, stands as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that whatever plagued the Corbin family defied all rational explanation. Charles himself suffered a mental breakdown following his son's death and spent his remaining years in an asylum, where attendants reported he would constantly whisper about the collector of children and the debt that must be paid. As the Victorian era dawned, the Corbins had learned to live with their curse. Some branches of the family chose not to have children at all, while others would send their firstborn away before their 7th birthday, hoping distance might offer protection, and never did. No matter where these children were, whether in Swiss boarding schools or with relatives in America, they were always found dead on the morning after their 7th birthday, always in the same position, always with the same expression of terror. In 1856, the curse claimed Victoria Corbin, the daughter of James Corbin, who had taken the drastic step of changing the family name and moving to a remote estate in Scotland. Despite these precautions, Victoria died exactly as her ancestors had. Driven by grief and rage, James returned to Corbin Manor and set fire to the East Wing, which housed Thomas Corbin's infamous library. While most of the occult collection was destroyed, James had thoroughly examined its contents first, searching for answers. Among the salvaged papers was Thomas Corbin's journal from his time in India. The journal contained references to a temple in the mountains north of Calcutta, where a holy man had shown Thomas a relic of immeasurable age. The holy man warned him never to remove it from its sacred resting place. Thomas described the relic as a small figurine carved from black stone, depicting a seated entity with the body of a child, but the face of an ancient. The holy man told Thomas the figurine was a vessel for a being that fed on the essence of innocence, specifically the untapped potential of young lives. According to Thomas's account, he dismissed these warnings as native superstition and secretly took the figurine when he left the temple. He wrote of strange dreams during his voyage back to England, dreams in which the figurine spoke to him, promising wealth and prosperity in exchange for the smallest of tributes. Thomas initially interpreted these dreams as manifestations of guilt, but as his subsequent writings grew increasingly disturbed, it became clear he believed he had made a bargain with something inhuman. The journal's final pages, written shortly after Jonathan's death, contained a frantically scrawled confession. "I have damned not only my soul, but the souls of all who shall come after me. The collector has marked us. The debt shall be paid through generations, and I am powerless to stop it." This journal provides the first solid clue to the origin of the Corbin curse, yet it raises more questions than it answers. What became of the black figurine? Was it destroyed in the library fire? Or does it still reside somewhere within Corbin Manor, continuing its grim harvest through the centuries? In 1887, renowned medium and spiritualist Helena Blavatsky was invited to Corbin Manor by Frederick Corbin, who had lost his son Alfred just 3 months prior. Blavatsky's detailed account of her séance at the manor describes making contact with what she called a consciousness of immense age and alien nature. She reported that this entity identified itself not as a human spirit, but as something that had existed before mankind crawled from the primordial ooze. Most disturbingly, Blavatsky claimed the entity spoke through her in a language Frederick Corbin identified as similar to the whispers his son had uttered in his sleep in the weeks before his death. Blavatsky advised Frederick to abandon the manor immediately, warning that the entity had attached itself not just to the Corbin bloodline, but to the very land itself. She refused to return for a second séance, and in later writings referred to Corbin Manor as a wound in the fabric of reality, through which something hungry peers into our world. Frederick Corbin did abandon the manor, moving his family to London and then eventually to Boston. But the curse followed. His second son, born in America and named William after his grandfather, died on his 7th birthday in 1895. He was found face down with arms outstretched on his bedroom floor in their Beacon Hill home, thousands of miles from Northam. And as we enter the 20th century, the Corbin family's tragic history becomes easier to track through newspaper accounts and medical records. In 1913, Peter Corbin, a respected surgeon in Edinburgh, approached his daughter Catherine's 7th birthday with clinical precision. He arranged for her to be under observation in a hospital, connected to early monitoring equipment that could record her heart rate and breathing. A team of nurses and fellow physicians kept a constant watch. The medical records from that night note that, at 2:45 a.m., Catherine's heart rate suddenly accelerated, though she showed no external signs of distress. At 2:57 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped so dramatically that ice crystals formed on the water glass beside her bed. At exactly 3 a.m., all electrical equipment in the room failed simultaneously. When emergency lights were activated 3 minutes later, Catherine was found on the floor beside her bed in the signature position of the Corbin curse. The medical equipment, once power was restored, showed no heartbeat. Peter Corbin's detailed report on his daughter's death represents one of the first attempts to document the curse using modern scientific methods. He noted that during the autopsy, no physical cause of death could be determined. Catherine's heart showed no abnormalities, and there were no signs of asphyxiation or trauma. Peter eventually published his findings in a medical journal under a pseudonym, describing what he called a death by fear so profound it caused the heart to simply cease functioning. The two world wars brought their own tragedies to England, and for a time, the Corbin curse seemed almost unremarkable amid the broader suffering. However, the pattern continued unabated. In 1942, during the height of the London Blitz, 7-year-old Thomas Corbin died in an underground shelter where his family had taken refuge from German bombs. Despite being surrounded by dozens of people in the crowded space, no one saw how the boy moved from his sleeping position between his parents to the cold concrete floor several feet away. He was discovered at dawn, face down with arms outstretched, wearing the same expression of terror that had marked Corbin deaths for over 250 years. In 1967, the curse took an unexpected turn with the case of James Corbin, a professor of anthropology at Cambridge University. Unlike his ancestors, James approached his son Robert's 7th birthday as an anthropological challenge rather than a supernatural curse. Having studied death rituals across cultures, James was convinced the consistent pattern of Corbin deaths represented a form of what he called familial death, imprinting a psychosomatic phenomenon where the expectation of death, according to a specific pattern, could actually manifest that pattern physically. James documented his theory extensively and arranged for Robert to be placed in a medically induced coma on the evening of his 7th birthday. His reasoning was that, if the child was unconscious, the psychological elements of the curse would be neutralized. Robert was admitted to a London hospital, sedated, and connected to the most advanced monitoring equipment available. A team of doctors, nurses, and 2 fellow anthropologists observed through the night. What happened next defies explanation. Despite being heavily sedated, at precisely 3:03 a.m., Robert's eyes opened. The monitoring equipment showed he remained in a comatose state, yet his eyes were wide and alert. According to witness statements, the boy began to whisper in what one nurse described as a voice that couldn't possibly have come from a child's throat. The temperature in the room plummeted, and several pieces of monitoring equipment shorted out. When the backup systems came online moments later, Robert was no longer in his hospital bed. Despite the room being locked from the inside and continuously observed, the boy was found on the floor, face down with arms outstretched in the classic position of the Corbin curse. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest, but could not explain how a sedated child could have moved from his bed, nor how his heart could have failed when the equipment had shown normal function. Right up until the power failure, James Corbin's colleagues published his research posthumously. James took his own life 3 days after his son's death, leaving behind a note that contained just 3 words: "It is real." This incident marked a turning point for the Corbin family. If even modern medicine in complete unconsciousness could not prevent the pattern from continuing, what hope did they have? Many Corbins chose not to have children at all, leading several branches of the family to die out completely by the end of the 20th century. Those who did continue the bloodline often took desperate measures. In 1983, Michael and Sarah Corbin gave their firstborn son up for adoption immediately after his birth, arranging for him to be placed with a family in New Zealand who were never told of his biological heritage. They legally changed their last name and moved to Canada, believing that if the child never knew he was a Corbin, he might be spared. Their efforts were in vain. On July 12, 1990, 7-year-old David Marshall-born David Corbin died in his bed in Auckland, New Zealand. He was found face down on the floor, arms outstretched, his face frozen in terror. The adoptive parents had no connection to the Corbin family and had never heard of the curse. Local authorities ruled it a case of sudden, unexplained death in childhood SUDC. But those familiar with the Corbin history recognized the unmistakable pattern. This case raises disturbing questions. How did the curse track down a child with no knowledge of his heritage, living on the opposite side of the world, under a different name? Was it tied to the bloodline itself, operating on a genetic level beyond our understanding? Or was it something more metaphysical, a debt that would be collected regardless of distance or awareness? In 1998, The remaining Corbins gathered at the ancestral manor, largely abandoned since the 1960s, for what they called a family council. Representatives from every surviving branch came together to share information, compare experiences, and search for missed patterns. They brought family records, journals, medical reports, and personal accounts spanning 3 centuries of tragedy. One attendee was Dr. Elizabeth Corbin, a geneticist studying the family's DNA for abnormalities that might explain the consistent cardiac arrests. While she found no obvious genetic markers for heart defects, she discovered something unusual, a distinctive genetic sequence present in all Corbin descendants that she could not identify. When she ran the sequence through international databases, she found partial matches in samples from ancient burial sites in northern India, precisely the region where Thomas Corbin had acquired the mysterious black figurine in 1677. Another participant, historian and Corbin descendant Richard Thorne, who had changed his name from Corbin at 18, presented an analysis of family records dating back to Thomas's original journal. He had identified a previously unnoticed pattern. The deaths always occurred on the night of the 7th birthday, but only when that birthday fell within 3 days of a new moon. If the birthday occurred during other lunar phases, the death would come on the night closest to the birthday that coincided with the new moon. This lunar connection added a new dimension to the mystery. Was there an astronomical component? Did Thomas Corbin inadvertently tie his family's fate to a cosmic cycle when he took the figurine? The most remarkable presentation came from Clara Corbin, an elderly woman who had lost her son Andrew in 1965, and Clara had devoted her life to researching the curse, and traveled to India in the 1970s to locate the temple mentioned in Thomas's journal. After years of searching, she claimed to have found it. Its ruins in a remote area of the Himalayan foothills. According to Clara, the temple had been dedicated to an entity the locals called the Collector of Potential, a being that fed on possibilities rather than actualities. The priests believed this entity existed in a state of perpetual hunger for the infinite possibilities contained within a developing human consciousness. A 7-year-old child, they believed, represented the perfect balance between a formed personality and unlimited potential, old enough to be an individual, but young enough that their future remained unwritten. Clara explained that the black figurine Thomas stole was not just a representation, but a vessel containing a portion of the entity's essence. By removing it, Thomas had broken ancient wards of containment, allowing the entity direct access to our world, with the Corbin bloodline as its entry point. Most disturbing of all, Clara revealed that in an inner chamber of the temple ruins, she discovered wall carvings depicting the entity's feeding process. These carvings showed children lying face down with arms outstretched, exactly the position in which every Corbin firstborn had been found. The family council concluded with a ritual designed by Clara, who had studied various protective practices during her travels. The gathered Corbins attempted to sever the connection between their bloodline and the entity. The ritual lasted from sunset to sunrise, culminating at the exact moment of the new moon. For a brief time, there was hope. 2 Corbin children passed their 7th birthdays without incident in 1999 and 2000, but in 2003, the curse returned with the death of Emily Corbin, who died in the familiar manner, despite her parents' adherence to the protective measures. In the years since, the pattern has continued unabated. Modern medical science has provided new insights. MRI scans of Corbin children have revealed unusual brain activity in the weeks leading up to their 7th birthdays, particularly during sleep. EEG readings have captured patterns consistent with someone engaged in conversation while the children are in deep sleep states. Several children, in the days before their deaths, reported seeing the old child in their dreams, figure they described as looking like a boy or girl their own age, but with ancient, hungry eyes. These children often drew pictures of this figure, showing remarkable consistency despite having no contact with one another. Perhaps the most compelling recent evidence comes from Jack Corbin, who died in 2017. His parents, both medical professionals, installed a sophisticated monitoring system in his room, including infrared cameras and temperature sensors. The footage from the night of Jack's 7th birthday shows the room growing progressively colder from midnight onward. At approximately 2:45 a.m., a shadow appears in the corner, a shadow that doesn't correspond to any physical object, and seems to move independently of the room's light sources. At 2:58 a.m., Jack, who had been sleeping peacefully, suddenly sat upright. His lips began to move, though the audio captured no sound. At exactly 3 a.m., the cameras experienced interference for precisely 15 seconds. When the image cleared, Jack was no longer in his bed, but lying face down on the floor, arms outstretched, already lifeless. This footage, analyzed by multiple experts, offers no definitive explanation. The shadow phenomenon has been replicated in other monitored cases, leading some researchers to suggest we are seeing not the entity itself, but its effect on our reality, a shadow cast by something moving through dimensions we cannot perceive. In 2020, a new approach was attempted with twins born to Rachel Corbin and her husband, Paul Winters. As the firstborn, their daughter Lily would traditionally be vulnerable. But some theorize that the entity's focus on firstborn potential might be confused or diluted with twins who share a womb and enter the world minutes apart. To test this, Rachel and Paul decided not to tell the twins which was born first. They reasoned that if the curse operated on awareness or belief, keeping this secret might protect both children. They created false birth certificates showing their son, Michael, as the firstborn, though in reality, Lily had preceded him by 8 minutes. This deception extended to everyone in the children's lives. As their 7th birthday approached in 2022, the family prepared protective measures based on Clara Corbin's ritual and modern monitoring equipment. On the night of July 7th, both children were put to bed in separate rooms, under observation by teams of medical professionals, paranormal researchers, and family members. The night passed without incident until 2:45 a.m., when temperature sensors in both rooms recorded a simultaneous drop. At 2:58, both children sat up and appeared to engage in one-sided conversations. Monitoring teams confirmed identical behavior in both rooms. At precisely 3 a.m., power fluctuations affected both systems, when emergency backups activated 12 seconds later. A horrifying discovery awaited. Lily Winters, the true firstborn, lay face down on the floor in the traditional position, while her brother Michael remained asleep in his bed, unaffected. The entity could not be fooled. It knew which child was truly the firstborn, even when that information was hidden from everyone, including the children themselves. This thoroughly documented case stands as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that the force plaguing the Corbins operates on a level beyond normal human understanding. It cannot be deceived, deterred by distance, or confused by ignorance. It adheres to its pattern with unwavering precision. This brings us to the present day and the most recent developments. In 2023, Dr. Meredith Kline, a quantum physicist with an interest in fringe phenomena, proposed a new theory after studying the family's history. Dr. Kline suggests what we are witnessing is not supernatural in the traditional sense, but a manifestation of what she calls quantum predation. Her theory posits that the entity described in the ancient texts is a consciousness existing primarily in quantum states, feeding on the collapse of quantum potentialities into single outcomes. A 7-year-old child, according to Dr. Kline, represents a nexus of nearly infinite potential futures. The entity, Thomas Corbin, brought into contact with his bloodline feeds on the moment when all those potential futures collapse into one, death. The position of the children face down, arms outstretched, represents what Dr. Kline calls a posture of quantum surrender. when all possibilities except one are extinguished. While controversial, her theory offers the first framework that attempts to explain the curse in terms that, while extraordinary, do not rely entirely on supernatural concepts. She has proposed creating a quantum shield around the next Corbin child, isolating them from the quantum field the entity might use to access our reality. The opportunity to test this may come soon. As of this recording, 3 Corbin descendants are approaching their 7th birthdays. One family has agreed to work with Dr. Klein. Another is pursuing religious protection from multiple faiths. The third has relocated to an undisclosed location under assumed names, though history suggests this is unlikely to succeed. What makes the Corbin curse so profoundly disturbing is not just its longevity or precision, but the questions it raises about reality itself. If an entity can track a bloodline across centuries and continents, claiming victims despite every precaution, what does that tell us about the world we think we understand? Are there forces and dimensions beyond our perception that can reach into our reality and extract what they need, regardless of our beliefs or defenses? The black figurine Thomas Corbin removed has never been found. Some believe it was destroyed in the 1856 fire. Others suggest it remains hidden within Corbin Manor's walls. A few descendants have proposed demolishing the building, but concerns about unleashing whatever is bound there have prevented this. The current owner, Richard Corbin, allows researchers controlled access. Those who have spent time inside report a sense of being watched, sudden cold spots, and whispers in an unidentifiable language. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in 2021 revealed anomalies beneath the manor's eastern foundation, not on any plans that may predate the Corbin. Excavation permits have been requested but not yet granted. As we conclude, we are left with more questions than answers. Is this an ancient entity brought to England by a merchant who didn't understand the forces he tampered with? A manifestation of quantum mechanics, or a pattern so deeply embedded in reality, it transcends our categories of natural and supernatural? What we know with certainty is this: for over 300 years, the firstborn children of the Corbin bloodline have died on their 7th birthdays, found in identical positions, their faces frozen in identical expressions of terror. No precaution has prevented it. No distance has forestalled it. No deception has confused it. The pattern continues with merciless precision, claiming generation after generation. The next Corbin's 7th birthday was to occur on October 31st, 2024, a date coinciding with Halloween and a new moon. 7-year-old William Corbin of Toronto represented the latest child, marked by this centuries-defying curse. His parents had agreed to work with Dr. Klein on her quantum shield theory, in what might have been the most scientifically advanced attempt to break the pattern. Would modern quantum physics succeed where religion, distance, deception, and medicine had failed? Or would William become the next child found face down, arms outstretched? As we waited to find out, one thing remained clear. The Corbin curse represents one of the most compelling and well-documented cases of unexplained phenomena in recorded history. If such a pattern can persist for centuries, defying all rational explanation, what other forces operate just beyond the limits of our understanding? The Corbins continued their desperate search for answers, racing against a clock that has been ticking since 1678. Update: after completing our initial research, we received troubling news. William Corbin, the 7-year-old boy mentioned in our conclusion, died on February 3, 2024, 8 months before his scheduled participation in Dr. Klein's experiment, though his 7th birthday was not until October. February 3rd marked the new moon closest to the 7th anniversary of a severe infant illness, a bout of pneumonia that had left him clinically dead for 3 minutes before doctors revived him. The entity, it seems, has adapted its pattern. William was found face down on his bedroom floor, arms outstretched, his face frozen in the same terror that has marked Corbin deaths for over 3 centuries. Dr. Klein theorizes the entity may be evolving, becoming more aggressive and claiming its tribute. If the pattern is changing, the remaining Corbins may have even less time to find a solution. We will continue to follow this case. For now, the Corbin curse remains unbroken, its hunger undiminished after 346 years. This has been Fearlit, bringing you the darkest truths from history's shadows. Remember, not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to remind us that our understanding of reality is far more limited than we care to admit. Until next time, keep watching the shadows. And if you hear whispers in a language you don't recognize, don't listen too closely.